Hey everyone, welcome back to the Particle Accelerator Podcast, where we talk to future thinking business leaders about how to accelerate their business and grow their team. I'm here with Janice. Janice, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for the invitation to your podcast today. So my name is Janice Nissen, and I am actually a nurse by degree and have been in healthcare primarily in the biopharmaceutical space at a couple of multinational companies. And today I am retired, but doing part-time consulting in the area of patient engagement, and particularly interested in the intersection between technology and patients and consumer behavior.
Awesome. So, what tech trend significantly impacted your industry, and how did your company respond, or how did you see one of your um, clients or previous employers? You can do whatever you want with the question, but what tech trend significantly impacted your industry?
Well, and it's happening right now, and it began even when I was working at the company 2 years ago, which is machine learning and artificial intelligence. So if you think about drug development, it is a very long process with a very high failure rate. And so anything that can be done that would help accelerate that and improve the efficiency of it is a huge, huge advance. And that was just beginning to happen when I was working in the biopharmaceutical field. So that continues to advance. And I think that although we have not seen major improvements in the drug development cycle in the last 20 years, we will definitely see that in the next 5 years based on the advances that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I had a biologist that was really into invasive species, and what I learned from her is that um, a lot of times to get an ML or machine learning, there's data models and really data sets that that if you have to go create the data set, your problem can be kind of long-winded. But if the data set exists, then you bring that into and you get maybe in additional details about different um, microbes, or you get additional details. So really the conversation with her really taught me about that the AI and machine learning is really about the data you give it, and that there are companies that provide these data sets, and that's really their core competency and their core business. And then people who are actually trying to do new experiments. But by knowing things about what you're trying to do, you can eliminate a lot of trial and error. And that seems like at the end of the day, the main result we're getting from AI and machine learning is to try the right things faster, verify them, but eliminating what used to take years of trial and error. We're able to have better guesses up front, and then we can do the clinical trial or the experiment.
Absolutely. And especially when you consider being able to create, biobanks of samples and bringing together all stakeholders that are interested in advancing biomedical research, whether that be regulators, academic centers, pharmaceutical companies, the NIH. When you bring them all together and everyone's sharing their data and it can be systematized, very rapidly, that's where you're really going to see, and we are already seeing changes. I mean, a good example of that was during COVID, where, all those stakeholders came together and said, let's bring everything that we think might be a treatment for COVID. Let's bring everything together that we know about making a vaccine. And that's why we got vaccines and treatments, within the space of 18 months.
Interesting. Really, everybody coming together very quickly. Interesting. So, what three technology innovations are you betting on to drive business growth?
Yes, so I've already mentioned, artificial intelligence and machine learning. But I guess a third one, and I don't know if it's, a technical term, but it's really systems integration. It's marrying up different data sets and systems in a way. So if you look at, again, I'm most familiar with healthcare, but if you look at
Yeah.
electronic medical records, electronic medical records that we all have. Um, are not very easily shared with other data sets that might be important to you if you're a patient. For example, I might be in a clinical trial. So how are we marrying those important pieces of data together? That's really not very it's not happening today. And so there's a lot of integration that still um, needs to happen in healthcare. And that's, I think, an area that, I would put as one of the top three, especially because if you look at as a country, we're spending what 18, 19% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. And if
Mm.
we can improve the data that we have to make smarter decisions about who should receive certain treatments and how can we prevent diseases because we know that these people are at risk, I mean, that is going to go a huge long way to reducing the amount we spend on healthcare.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Um, I think I really feel that I'm 40, in my late 40s here, and I'm experiencing that I have a GP, and then then I can go see specialists, but they don't really talk to each other, and they don't particularly know what the other is doing or what I'm talking to about. You would think that the GP would refer, but if I were to go to a specialist, I could. It just seems kind of like it's almost created for siloing. It not really. I don't. And it seems intentional almost.
No, it's a very, very good point. And, if you figure that, half of the American population has a chronic disease. So to your point, they're going to possibly have diabetes and hypertension, which might be seeing, an endocrinologist and a cardiologist. And so, yeah, all of that needs to be melded together so that it's not putting the patient in the place where they have to ensure that that integration and that coordination is happening.
Hmm. Yeah, man, I'm so excited to get into this with you, really, because my wife is loves naturopathy. I mean, she's just all about the and she's also gotten into really reducing any kind of like the chemical footprint in the house is really like we use one kind of soap for everything. We actually love to make fun of her for it because only buy organic foods. There's just so much that I think a lot of people feel like kind of been done wrong as they realize what's healthy and what's not healthy. The food pyramid seems like a sham.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this commercialization that has worked its way into medicine. So I have to ask, for being in pharmaceutical for so long, what have you been seeing, and um how how do you feel, or what are your thoughts around this kind of trend from go to the doctor, do exactly what the doctor says, to now more of a homeopathic, naturopathic process? I'm just, yeah, I'm really curious what your point of view as an insider is there.
But you're definitely right that we've moved away from a place where, the physician dictated everything and we just followed direction, right? So, because information's everywhere for us, we are Googling what, condition or disorder that we have. We're coming up with our own remedies in some cases. So, I think it's very, very different because information is so readily available. I like the fact that people are more involved and are trying to take more control and having a more equal relationship with the provider to make decisions with them and not on behalf of them. So I think that's all very good. The issue that I am most concerned about, so I don't know a lot about, homeopathic or natural medicine per se, but what I do get concerned about is basically trust in science. That there is, because there are so many information sources and not all of them can be fact checked, if you will, that there are many people today in the US that don't believe anything, that don't believe anything that comes out of the FDA, that don't believe anything that comes out of the NIH. So I think that's a kind of a troubling area. um, you know, Good example is the fact that, very famous podcasters were encouraging people during COVID to take a vaccine that was meant for animals because supposedly, it cured COVID. And that had been debunked, and it was, repeatedly shown that that was only going to harm people, not help people. But so there are so many different people who now quote are experts in medicine, and that can be very confusing and also concerning.
Yeah, that's interesting. I almost feel like in much the same way we're now learning um, some of the dangers of the Industrial Revolution or mass production of food, mass production of chemicals. Like we're kind of coming through the Industrial Revolution into this health crisis. That we were clumsy with with those advancements, and then we've also advanced in the information age, and we're very clumsy now with this new power. So, what I kind of see is we're starting to become more responsible. So, just because we can mass produce wheat, and now tons of people, including members of my household, can't digest wheat products because of gluten
Mm,
intolerance.
mm,
Um, we're also seeing like, okay, well, what information should we digest, and what information should we not digest, right? Um, and this will probably be. I was at a biohacking conference by David Asprey. He sponsored it here in Dallas, where I live, and went to that. And a lot of this NAD is a new kind of reverse aging supplement that everybody's
mm,
talking about. They've identified this molecule in the cell that it repairs the cell, and so NAD, you're hearing about it on social media. You're hearing, okay, NAD, all this. Well, so there was a talk from a particular researcher or doctor about NAD, and it was, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of things in healthcare are part research and part sales pitch. Like you don't usually get research without the pitch.
yeah.
But what was really cool is that she did have research on her particular approach to stimulating NAD, and in that was also research as to why just trying to go get like an IV of NAD was probably not the best thing for you. Like it doesn't exist outside the cell. So if you're going to get an intravenous dose of it, there's a reason why you don't feel good. Like there's a reason why nausea is a side effect, and because it doesn't in your body, it doesn't normally exist outside the cell. So what I learned from that, long-winded here, is that I could read the research paper and I could understand it. I could see who was the test done on, what age were they, what gender were they, like who were these people that had the successful results. And what I also learned is that in most trials, they will like pick slightly older males who generally would benefit from anything. You know, like if these slightly older males drank water, like more water, they would probably see some kind of positive result. But in the particular test that she showed, it was a wider range, it was a high number of people. And so I tended to believe what she was saying because she was revealing the quality of the research. And I think that goes to your point. We now have information, we can start to look deeper into the science-backed reason or the evidence-based approach to these different remedies.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's good to hear. It's good to hear.
Cool. Well, what do you think some of the most significant gaps between your ambitions, like where you'd like to see things go, and the realities of today?
Yeah, so it's trying to keep up. I would say, there is so much advance that's happening in the way of technology and tools, and I try my best to stay up to date on what the trends are. But I think it's a bit of a challenge to be able to do that. So, I love the advances that we're seeing, but you also worry that you're going to be slipping behind as well. So I think part of that then means, how do you engage people like yourself in these kinds of discussions? How do you stay networked? How do you stay connected to younger people, to
Mhm.
understand what they're watching, what they're following, and what questions they have? I think is all part of, trying to stay relevant.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That yeah, it is a challenge since I'm around a lot of young tech people. My older kids who are 21 and 18, I'll spout off some, you know, new slang and use it properly, and they're like, "Whoa, Dad,
Yeah.
how did you even know about that?" Like, there's way. I have my ways. I know how
Yeah.
to. Um, it is. Have you figured out anything so far? What's your current approach to staying relevant?
Yeah, so because I'm very involved in healthcare and follow it closely, I like to be a student of healthcare just dedicating every day, the opportunity to read and stay up to date so that I can do the best job possible too on the consulting that I am, currently involved in and doing. So, um, I think it's basically reading, attending webinars as best you can in conferences.
Yeah, that's great. Are you? I think one of the barriers for the veterans that I have in my business, the industry veterans that I have, is that they have this amazing generalism. So it's it's the continuation of that old saying, the jack of all trades, master of none.
Mm,
um, it's the full continuation of that. Like they have deep knowledge, and I'm sure you do too, in areas of the industry that most people just dabble in, and so that breadth of knowledge. I think the challenge is that breadth of knowledge is not usually provided or consumed anymore in direct interpersonal communication. Right? We don't go to the office.
mm.
I have found an immense pressure and benefit from like this podcast and sharing on social media and creating videos for my employees. Have you felt the pressure to be a content creator in this kind of new ecosystem?
Yes, I mean, you need to, especially if you're going to be providing consulting services to another entity. So, absolutely. I think it's all part of again trying to stay up to date on what the trends are and looking for a place that you can insert some of the expertise that you have. Um, and making sure that that expertise is still, relevant in today's world. So, yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Awesome. How do you approach risk management when you're consulting folks in your industry?
Yes, so risk is all part of understanding the implications of decisions that you're making, and not only are they, risk to the business, are they risk to the people, are they risk to reputation? So it's sort of taking a kind of 360 view of what potential risks are, and so I think it's all part of having a consistent sort of SWOT framework, if you will, in your head when you're
Hmm.
thinking about the environment. I serve on a couple of boards, for example, and I find that that's really important that as a board member that we are constantly thinking about the current environment. Are there opportunities that are presenting themselves quite recently that we should take advantage of that weren't there last year? Are there new threats that we need to think about? And then what does that mean for the business that we're representing? So that's, I think, that's just a simple thing, and it's kind of an old school thing of a SWOT analysis. But I find that really, really a helpful framework and construct to have in your head all the time.
Absolutely. Um, cool. So, what advice can you share for connecting roadmaps and really kind of the activities or the tactics with the overall business strategy? Interested in how you like to help people plan.
How I like to help people plan. Well, I guess I'll go back to the previous answer, which is you can't effectively plan unless you have a good understanding of what the current environment is. And so I
Hmm.
think back to understanding that from a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I think is really really important. Um, Most of the time, we are. Um, Planning for what's currently going to happen in the next several months, but we're also planning further out for what are our priorities in the upcoming year or two. And so having both the short range and the long range view is really part of the planning process. And then embedded in all that is understanding, what's going to differentiate us from others that we're competing with. So always having that sort of competitive view. Um, what can we all build together? All boats rise with building a bigger market, for example. But also within that, how do we compete against our primary competitors? Whether that be another hospital, whether that be another academic institution that you find yourself in competition with, whatever it is, that's also the view that I think you need to have.
Mm, interesting. What do you have an example of a time when an initiative failed to deliver expected value and what you learned from that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess failure is the biggest learning that you can ever ask for. Trying to think of a specific situation, I would say probably back in my pharmaceutical career, um, thinking about selling vaccines through a new channel, which was the retail pharmacy. And I would say and although ultimately there was a business opportunity there, and we continue to pursue it, what we totally underestimated is that really wasn't their core business. And so, how were you ever going to get the time and attention of a busy pharmacist who is really incented on how many generic prescriptions they're filling per minute, per hour, whatever, and then embed in this another activity of doing vaccination that takes time and effort and patient counseling and all of that. And so we know today that that is happening. In fact, I just went last week and got a flu vaccine, and I got it at retail pharmacy. But I would say that we underestimated just the distraction that can cause. And many times you can work with and have a discussion with people at a senior level who think at the practical store level that something's going to work, and you realize that they don't have as good an understanding of what happens at that lower level. And I would say that that was the biggest uh, learning and understanding that we have. So as a result, you have to just scale back what your expectations are of that. And I would say that was probably a pretty good example of missed expectations.
Hmm. So, what kinds of things? What kinds of things? Because when I think of pharmacy, I think I only think of the retail pharmacy.
Hmm.
So, what is the opposite of the retail pharmacy, or what's the level above that?
The level above that meaning it.
Yeah, what is the different? Like, I've never. You said you went to the retail pharmacy to get your flu vaccine. So that's like going to CVS to actually get
Correct.
the vaccine administered, as opposed to doing that at your GP.
Yes, as opposed to going to your GP or a health department, for example. Sometimes
Hmm.
employers are doing vaccination clinics. So yes, so that is the option.
I
Uh,
see.
mhm.
And then what was the learn like? So certain things can be done in a minute clinic. That was kind of the shift. So what could you not do with a minute clinic, or how did what did folks learn from that? That like kind of shook them up from what they could do at the GP.
Well, the convenience is the for the retail pharmacy is terrific. I mean, on every corner you have a Walgreens or CVS, right?
Right.
So, and generally they're people that are from that neighborhood, if you will, and so they're trusted. So I think that's why it's so convenient and why many of us go there. Plus, you're in there for other things, and someone's reminding you, did you get your flu vaccine? Do you want to get it today? So, unlike your doctor's office, who may or may not reach out to you, to remind you that it's important to get a flu vaccine. So, I think that was another learning. The other one is retail pharmacy, because they're on every corner, because they have a huge volume of people coming in on a daily basis. There was a thought that could they actually enroll people in clinical trials? And that's something that, just based on the facts that there are so many people going into a pharmacy every day, looks like an opportunity, and in reality it didn't work out at all,
Mm,
because there's a lot of questions that people ask. There's a lot of requirements to be in a trial, and that took a lot of time. And so pharmacists just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to engage in those kinds of really important, detailed discussions. So
mm,
although many of these pharmacy chains have said we would like to do that, they've now all backed away, from that.
mm. Very interesting. Okay, yeah, now I understand. Okay, cool. So the more controlled environment is not quite in that minute clinic, but if it's administration of an injection, that
Mhm.
seems to be working fine. Okay, interesting. Um, cool. That was great. That was fascinating to think about the impact that. Um, I mean, what an also just kind of how do you think that the general practitioners felt about that transition?
Generally, they liked it, because obviously the vaccination rates, went up, and it made it convenient for them, to keep their schedule open for more complex visits for people that have hypertension, or people that have, pulmonary disease, etc. So yeah, so generally they're very supportive of that.
Yeah. I've also found this fascinating that like a general practitioner, if a person's generally healthy, may only see that person once every 2 to 5 years, right? Like their visit. So when I think about but going into a pharmacy, that's a more frequent occurrence. Um, yeah, that's fascinating to think about taking that burden off the GP, but then um, I just wonder how we transition to more of a preventative care rather than a reactive care. If and so what I'm finding from the naturopath world is that like ordering your own blood tests and seeing if your metrics are within your blood test metrics, like doing a full panel, it's kind of expensive, but maybe worth the money. And then seeing which elements of your blood panel are within range. This is something
Mhm.
I try to do really every 6 months or so. And I've gotten phenomenal just intel from that. And then, it's given me like the springboard. Um, so yeah, any thoughts there on like just the relationship that folks have with healthcare and
Yeah, I
the
think you bring up
frequency of interaction?
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point, and most of the experts that say, how can we improve our health, and how can we reduce our healthcare expenditure, the number one thing that they say is preventative care, and having a primary care doctor and having a relationship with them, so that you are seeing them on a regular basis. So, imagine the fact that if you are regularly seeing a provider, you're going to catch things. You're going to catch your high blood pressure early. You're going to catch your pre-diabetes situation, and can intervene before you're going to have to be on a medication. So cancer screening as well. So there's just so much that can be done for both your own health, and then reducing healthcare expenditures by just engaging in the healthcare system. What we find now is that it's difficult. I don't know when's the last time you tried to get an appointment with your primary care doctor, but many times it's quite a long wait. Or you might be on hold for a very long time trying to get that appointment. And so sometimes we're still finding it difficult, and it's not a good consumer experience, if you will, just to even get care.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Yeah. Um, what do you think it will take for the healthcare industry to shift towards more of a preventative care?
Yeah, so I think if we can continue to provide examples, where you're reducing, illness, you're reducing costs, you're improving, someone's life expectancy by following preventative care. And the more that we can kind of advertise that, publish that, communicate around that, I mean, that I believe goes a long, long way. And, making sure that we're putting it out on particular channels that it's easy to understand the information. You mentioned earlier you read a clinical study and you understood it. For most people, it's not in quote health literate terms that they
Mm.
understand. And so we need to do a better job of communicating in a way that all people, can understand as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe the AI can help us with that a bit, right? The
Yes.
understanding of the kind of plain languaging the medical research. Um, well, tell me a little bit about your consulting. Who is your ideal client, and what is it that you would like to work on the most?
Yes. So I mentioned early on that I am a nurse by background. And so, although I've gone on and received my MBA and then a master's in population health, um, what one of the things that nurses do really well is they always have the patient in mind. They're the ones of all the healthcare professionals that are closest to the patient because they're delivering care. They're closest to understanding their family situation and social situation. And so, my consulting is with the idea of patient engagement. So putting the patient at the center of the healthcare issues and challenges that we are having. So we started out talking about how typically the physician is the learned intermediary because they're the one that are diagnosing and prescribing and managing treatment. But more and more, it is more shared decision making between a very informed patient, consumer, and their provider. And to the extent that we can bring in the patient, who is the person living with the disease, and understand what they are going through as we think about designing and developing new treatments, I think that's critically important. In the past, we have relied on, quote, the experts, the scientific leaders, the key opinion leaders. And in reality, we need those perspectives, but we also need the people who are living with that condition every day because the experts don't always know what a patient values. Do I want a longer life? Do I want a better quality of life? Do I want to live with these types of side effects or do I not? And so that's what I'm very passionate about and the type of consultation that I try and do with clients.
Interesting. And so, who would your ideal client be that's working on that patient experience?
Yeah, so it can be uh, for example, I work with the NIH Foundation, which does public-private partnerships, bringing um, all uh, all of the stakeholders together, whether that be regulators, industry, academic leaders, patient organizations, and patients themselves, to work on, what are some of the most vaccine and complicated diseases that we're dealing with, whether it be things like Alzheimer's or cancer or lupus, whatever it may be. So bringing the patient perspective into how they do their work. And so that's currently the work that I'm doing today.
Awesome. What was your first job? Like for me, it was a paper route. I'm asking all the way back, how'd you make your first dollar?
Okay. I think I made my first 50 cents as actually a babysitter for a family across the street. So that was actually my my first dollar, if you will.
Cool. Awesome. What toy or hobby did you have as a child that inspired what you do career wise today or what you did career wise?
Yeah, so I was a big fan of Barbie dolls. And so, the Barbie doll uh, craze actually kind of brought me into the medical field because there was a lot of playing around with the fact that the Barbies were sick and were in the hospital. I actually was hospitalized with a ruptured appendix when I was 9 years old. So I think that also influenced my interest in the medical area and medical field very early on.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. We have a cockapoo and my daughter who's 5. She's the youngest of 4 kids. And the only girl. And so she has a lot of Barbies. And the cockapoo occasionally will chew on the Barbie. And
Oh
so
no.
I found myself like, could we do a prosthetic arm or hand for a Barbie, right? And I guess you can actually buy Barbie body parts, and with a little surgery, you could
Yeah,
probably get a hand back on a Barbie. So
yeah.
I just thought that was fun to put the Barbie in the hospital after the accident.
Right. That's funny.
Um, and what was your favorite and least favorite course in school?
Mm, probably math was the least favorite. Most favorite was biology. So really like science, but less so on the math.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. What quote from a famous person lives in your mind rent free?
That lives in my mind rent free.
Yes.
I love that. Can I take a quote from a song?
Sure. Yeah, I would love
Okay.
that.
So favorite song is "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey. So absolutely love that. Love the words in that song. Love the fact that it was the last episode of The Sopranos with the
Uh-huh.
cliffhanger, where you never really knew what exactly happened at the end of that. Just left it to your imagination.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, and then what do you think the greatest invention or discovery was in the past 300 years?
Oh yes, I have to say vaccines. And it's often been quoted that aside from clean water, the greatest, public health advance that we've had has been vaccines. When you think about diseases that are no longer, endemic anywhere, and a problem, whether it be, smallpox, and the fact that, childhood vaccines are well integrated into our healthcare system and keeping, children safe. This isn't what you saw in the 1800s. So I think that that's a huge advance, and I really hope that we will continue to pursue vaccines for a number of things. I mean, right now there's work happening on cancer vaccines. So how can you use a vaccine to prevent cancer, which I'm very excited about and feel like that's going to be a real advance for us.
Awesome. Well, if people like what you've had to share or want to connect with you, how would you like them to do that?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm actively on that platform. So, please have them reach out.
All right, cool. We'll make sure that that gets in the show notes. Really awesome conversation. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.